Do you know your purpose in life? What about your passion? What are you passionate about? Well, today we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to give you some ideas and thoughts I've been having here lately about that in my own private practice journey. So thanks for joining me today. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. This is episode number 37 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me and so glad you found us here at the Practice of Therapy podcast. If this is the first time you're listening to the podcast, glad you found us and hope you'll continue to listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you might listen to the podcast. And if you've been a listener all along, welcome back, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're listening to the podcast. I really hope that the podcast will be helpful for you in your journey and wherever you are. If you're in private practice or already or thinking about private practice as a counselor, therapist, or social worker, I really hope that the information is helpful for you and helps you in some way in your practice. You know, in this episode, I'm going to do things maybe a little differently in that what has been on my mind and just what I've been thinking about here lately has kind of come about as I've gone to several conferences. Last month, I'm recording this in May of 2018, but last month in April, I had the Tennessee Marriage and Family Therapy Association Conference, or Counseling and Therapy Summit, that we did in conjunction with the Tennessee Licensed Professional Counselors. And then this past weekend, I went to another conference that I'm going to tell you a little more about later here in the episode, but it had to do specifically with the opioid crisis that we're seeing here in Tennessee and across the nation, and just really some thoughts that I had about that and just the impact that has made for me in my own practice. So, if this is the first time you've run into the Practice of Therapy at practiceoftherapy.com, I would really like to invite you to go over and take a look at the website and listen to me. Kind of get mixed up in my head between what I'm reading and what I'm listening to. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so listen is a way that I consume information. But anyway, I got off on a tangent there. But go over to practiceoftherapy.com and take a look at the resources I have there. Lots of different resources that I'm trying to put together and keep adding content to the website. And it's really geared towards those people that are thinking about private practice or maybe working for an agency and moving into private practice and trying to figure out the logistics of that and trying to go into those things. Also, I've just got a lot of tools out there that I'm putting together and continuing to kind of perfect and make available to people. One is the G Suite course, and I'm going to be putting out in fact, I'll put in the show notes here a link to a Google G Suite cheat sheet. I'm getting my tongue tied here. That I put together just to really talk about some of the things that you can do with Google G Suite. If you're not familiar with that, Google G Suite, the tools of G Suite are available through Google and through their Google for Business subscription that you can get. But on that cheat sheet and on those, it's really called the Tips and Hacks for Google G Suite. That are my top hacks and tips for that. You can take a look at that and get that download, and I'll put that in the show notes here of how you can access that. As a matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and say it's going to be practiceoftherapy.com /G Suite download. And that way you'll have that available to you. But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is one of the things that I know that is very important for people in this private practice journey is being able to find mentors and people that can help you along the way. And one of the best ways I know to do that has worked just so well for me, and it might not be for everybody, but it has worked well for me, is being part of a mastermind group. And so if you go over to practiceoftherapy.com/mastermind and just take a look at the mastermind group and what that might could offer for you. I'm really trying to get another group formed here. As you might be listening to this, again, I'm recording this in the middle part of May 2018, but I'm really trying to get a group together so that we can really learn from each other and really make that support available to people. So take a look at those things over at thepracticeoftherapy.com. Today, like I mentioned, I'm going to really kind of talk about some of the things that I've been thinking about around purpose and finding your passion in private practice or just in your journey in general, and really think about how that has kind of come together for me over the last few weeks in thinking about my own practice and my own purpose and journey in this realm of clinical work and also just being in business as a private practice owner. So do you remember the first time you made the decision to go into the profession you're in? And it might be something that you kind of decided a long time ago in terms of, somewhere along the way, maybe in high school or maybe even in junior high, or maybe influenced by a therapist or a counselor in some way. Or, maybe it was a parent or somebody else, but I bet for most of you out there, at least it was for me, you had some people in your life that really kind of influenced and made an impression on you. It might be that you went to counseling or you went to therapy, and that therapist, just that relationship you had with that therapist really made a big impact on you. And so you decided to pursue this career as a counselor or a therapist or social worker or really any of the other helping professions. But I know for me, one of the times that I guess there were two things that happened for me in college. I had a professor, Dr. Godwin, and Dr. Godwin was just one of those gentle, I really kind of thought of him as a gentle giant. He was kind of a big man, but he just had, his demeanor was just so approachable and just so easy to get along with. And just the way that he taught. I majored in psychology as an undergraduate, and just the way that he taught things just really made an impact on me. And I don't know that when I first had my first class with him, don't know that I actually had made the decision to go into this field. I think I'd shared with some of you before that I originally had planned when I went to college, was going to go into the medical field and become a doctor. And what happened is that when I did that, when I got into college, I realized that, okay, there is just a skill set that is just going to be difficult for me to learn, and that was chemistry. I mean, I probably could have learned it, but it just didn't come naturally for me. So I kind of looked at, okay, what are my other options here? So, but Dr. Godwin was an influence, and then just also my mom is a marriage and family therapist. So I had my parents to influence me as well. My dad was a pastor, and so I grew up in kind of the helping realm, and I'm sure a lot of that had a lot to do with why I approached this career and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. But I think a lot of times too we get those different turning points in our life where something happens or there's an event or something that just kind of strikes a chord, and it really kind of speaks to our passion and maybe gives us a sense of purpose in what we're doing. One of the things that I know just from having done this a long time is that our course and the way that we do our practice and the way that I'm doing things now isn't at all like it was when I first began. And I think my vision and my understanding of what my practice would look like and the direction I would go with my practice was totally different when I first started as to where it is now. I think when I first started into private practice, I thought, well, I'm just going to have a solo practice and just do my own thing and not really worry about others. But what I found is that didn't really line up with who I am as a person and the things that I'm passionate about. Certainly the work that I do with clients is something that I'm passionate about and something that I'm sure I'll continue doing for a while, but also just helping other therapists learn how to be better therapists and learn how to do the whole clinical side of things, but also the business side of things has become part of my passion. But, as I mentioned, there are times when we go through things or experience things that can cause us to kind of change our mind, or not so much change our mind, but really change our course. And one of the things that has happened for me in this over the past few months is really becoming, there's been a lot of press about it, as we all know in this field, about the opioid crisis and the opioid epidemic. There's just been a whole lot in the news and in the press about that. And at the conference that I went to back in April, at the Tennessee Marriage and Family Therapy Conference, that was really kind of our focus and part of who our keynote addresses were by, and really just kind of giving us some statistics and some understanding of what's going on, that this has caused such a huge impact in our society. I'm not trained as an addiction specialist, but like probably a lot of you run into with your practices, is that very much becomes an issue, or we run into that issue a lot with our clients, either dealing with a family member that might have an addiction problem, or even the clients themselves. Of course, generally, if it's a person that has a pretty significant addiction problem, I really try to refer them out and get them the help from people that are really trained with that particular niche and that area specifically. But also just dealing with family members having to deal with maybe a child or a spouse or whatever that has an addiction problem, that comes into things. So, but one of the things that I realized in terms of my own passion and purpose is realizing that particular issue around the opioid crisis that we're seeing now really lines up and really struck a chord with me of say, okay, I need to do something more. I need to do something that is going to really live into that particular passion that just kind of came up for me, or that particular purpose. So one of the things that I've done is gotten involved in some activism isn't the word, advocacy is the word I'm looking for, advocacy work around that. And particularly in my community, of becoming involved with this organization that started in conjunction with many of the local churches. It's called the Holy Friendship Summit, and I'll put a link to that in our show notes. And it was something that was spearheaded, but really by Duke University and their theology department, and that overlap between their medical program and their theological training and all of that. And there were several kind of local people that became aware of that, and so they brought in the folks from Duke, and they formed this conference, and it has been a really exciting thing to see, and really seeing a lot of folks come together to address this particular issue. But I think the important thing about this is that, at least for me, is it really helped me reground myself in what I'm passionate about, and as you've heard from me several times before, of really discovering what your why is, why you're doing what you're doing. And I think when we can get in touch with that, of really understanding our passion and why we're doing what we're doing, it makes our job easier to some degree, but also gives us a lot of meaning in our work. You know, one of the things that I would really like to emphasize with those of you out there that might be listening to the podcast, specifically those of you that are in the helping professions, you really need to understand how important the work that you do is to people. I think that so many times we feel like we get this message that we're not doing it right, and we have kind of this imposter syndrome, and that, well, I haven't had enough training, or I haven't had enough experience in what I'm doing. You know, I'm not the expert, so to speak. But just by simply going in and listening to people and being genuine with people, you're making a difference. And that was one of the things that I think I learned from this conference this past weekend, about the importance of listening and being able to do what we do naturally in our professions, and that's just show empathy for people. And really, when it comes down to it, the opioid crisis is a crisis, not so much of addiction. Addiction is a symptom, but addiction is where addiction really comes from, is people that are in pain, people that have been traumatized, and people that are really feeling kind of empty inside. And so I guess some of the big takeaways that I got from that was being able to help people connect with someone that they know that really truly cares. And that's what we do best in our profession, of really just showing that empathic way of listening to people and just simply being present with people as they go through the struggles of life. And as I've shared with many of you before, I'm also a clergy person in the Episcopal Church. I'm a vocational deacon, is what you would call my title, or my ordination designation. But the thing that I think is so many people are hungry for is to be able to find meaning in life and find purpose in life. And I think when we find that for ourselves, it makes it much easier to share with others. And so if you're listening to this, I would really encourage you to tap into that for yourself. I know it has brought a lot more meaning to my work and in my practice and what I share with folks day in and day out. And I think that there are a whole lot of hurting people out there, and you're just, if you're listening to this, you're just the person that might be the impact in their life, and be that person that is going to help change their lives and help them overcome the things that they overcome. There's this thing that I like to refer to as the ministry of presence. And I know ministry, the word ministry might not fit for everyone, which that's okay. But just being present with people is where we make a clinical difference. You know, when I'm working with supervisees, people that are going through the licensure process, you know, one of the things that I try to encourage them to do is just go in and be themselves, and just simply be present with people, and be able to just genuinely listen to people's stories and understanding the traumas and the hurts that they might have gone through in their life. You know, not to beat it to death, but I do want to just reemphasize the fact that you are making a difference in people's lives. And a lot of times we kind of lose sight of that, especially, you know, for those clients. And I'm sure some of you have had clients like this where they come to you for maybe a couple of sessions, and then they just kind of disappear and we don't see them again, and we don't feel like on our end we never really we don't feel like we ever really completed the therapeutic work with them. But you'd be surprised at the seed you plant. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients come back to me or come talk to me later on, and it's one of the, maybe sometimes those clients that you barely remember, and they tell me, you made such a big difference in my life. And so, again, I just don't want you to lose sight of that. The other thing that I wanted to just bring up before we close is recognizing and giving yourself permission to let your passions change. As I mentioned earlier, I went to these conferences that were, pretty close together in time and very much kind of the same theme around the opioid addiction crisis and all of the problems that have led to this phenomenon. One of the things, an epiphany I had is that my passion kind of changed or shifted a little bit. I've always kind of considered my niche as working with men that have struggled with pornography addictions and that sort of thing, and then working with the couples around those issues. But after really paying attention to what I learned in the conferences and just really starting to see this big overlap in my own practice, my passion and the things that I'm focusing on are really making sure that I learn more about this particular issue so that I can be better ready to help those people that come in that are struggling with addictions to opioids and also just any other substance for that matter. And like I said earlier, I'm not really trained as an addiction specialist, but those issues affect people on the periphery, and I think we need to be ready to address those issues and know how to help people with those issues. So that's about all I have for today. Hopefully my rambling hasn't been too boring for you, but again thank you for tuning in and listening to the podcast, and hopefully this will be meaningful for you and maybe strike a chord with you and just thinking about your passion and your purpose in life, and particularly around your career and what you're doing in your practice. It's so important to know your why, know what your purpose is, and have some passion about that. It just brings so much meaning to life. Well, folks, thanks again for joining me in the Practice of Therapy podcast. And do take the time to go over and subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening, whether it be on iTunes or Stitcher or even Spotify now, and Heart Radio, and all the different ways in which you can listen to podcasts. And take the time to give us a rating as well, an honest feedback about what you're learning and just your opinion of the podcast. That helps us so much, and it helps me know what your needs are. Also, take the time to go over and look at the website, practiceoftherapy.com, and take a look at those two resources I mentioned at the beginning. One being the G Suite course and being able to download those the hacks and tips for G Suite, and that's a free download. And just if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite download, and you can get that for free. And then also take a look at the mastermind groups and learn about that. Getting that together, and we'll continue to get those together. Hopefully lots in the future. I just love that format, and I know from my own experiences I've learned a whole lot from that. So tune in next week for the next episode. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've got Jane Carter as my guest, and it's going to be a little bit of a continuation of what I talked about today. And Jane is going to talk about her finding your superpowers as a clinician and finding out more about where you want to be in your practice and doing what fits you best. So take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. If you haven't already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.